Welcome to the walkthrough of the frequently made mistakes for assignment 4B. First, please make sure to document your code thoroughly. And second, please make sure to run all the regression tests, including the unit tests and the integrated test. Running these tests and making sure they pass is essential to getting a good grade. Let's take a look at some problems with build model. First, make sure that you initialize the Palantiri map field. Otherwise, you get a Java null pointer exception. That, of course, should be found if you run the regression tests, so make sure you run them. Secondly, down here, this code makes no sense since it's checking to see if the value of E, which is the entry set item for each element that's being run with the for each loop, is true, and then it sets E's value to true, which makes no sense. There's been code written in other assignments to do much the same thing, so either take a look and see how you did it, but if you did it wrong there, then please check out previous frequently made mistakes videos to get some hints on how to implement the logic here to initialize the Palantiri map. Let's now move down into some problems with acquire. There were a number of problems with acquire. First, there's no need to have a loop here. You can use an if statement and refactor the code a bit. Secondly, down here, you need to make sure you set the iterator back to the beginning after you unlock the ReadLock and then acquire the lock interruptibly. And then for sure, don't return here since you actually haven't got a valid key. Instead, just go ahead and let the loop back around to the top after resetting the iterator and then start the whole process over again. Let's take another look at another acquire problem. This code needs to be put into a loop. This is the grad student version that uses streams. You need to be able to put this code into a loop since the logic may not succeed on the very first try. It may take several iterations. And also make sure you don't call SetValue here, since at this point you should only have a ReadLock and not a WriteLock. You only try to acquire or try to convert the ReadLock to a WriteLock if you manage to find something that's going to have the value of true. Let's come down and take a look at some more problems with acquire. So there's no need for a while loop here. There's no need, please don't be calling Palantiri next twice. You can see it's being called up here. And then it's being called down here again. That's going to cause all kinds of insanity. Instead, you want to go ahead and use entry and get the value from entry, since you don't want to keep advancing the iterator. Come down here. You don't want to be using replace. You want to be using entry set value, and that's more efficient. And then also, this particular implementation doesn't properly handle the case where the write stamp equaled 0. In other words, it was not possible to convert the ReadLock stamp to a WriteLock stamp. So you need to make sure you handle that case properly as well. Continuing on with some problems with acquire, this code here has 2 loops. There should be 1 loop that handles all the logic below rather than having 2 separate loops. So you'll need to nest the second loop, or not really the loop, but you'll need to nest things properly so that you do it correctly. In particular, you may need to loop back around again because this may not succeed right away. But when it does succeed, then you're going to try to see if you can do the conversion to the WriteLock. And this should not be a second loop here. This needs to be nested under the loop above and changed from a loop into some if statements and so on. So need to rethink this code, refactor it, make it so it works properly. Let's take a look at yet another problem with acquire. This problem has all kinds of problems with race conditions since it doesn't use StampedLock at all. And of course, since it's not using StampedLock, then it doesn't implement the conditional WriteLock behavior that's called for in the specification above, if you look at the actual comments in the code. And in particular, what's not happening here is it's not starting out by acquiring a ReadLock, then checking to find the first available Palantir, and then trying to convert that ReadLock to a WriteLock. So all that stuff has to be done in order to make this code work properly. Yet another problem, please make sure you restructure your code using the updated skeletons that I pushed to my GitHub repository. We want to separate out the version that is for the undergrads versus the grads, so please make sure you do that. Also, this implementation isn't meeting the comment specification above. You need to use an iterator. This is basically a for each loop that's using the entry set. You need to use an iterator here. And then down here, as always, avoid using the put method on the Palantiri map, but instead use the entry that you get from the iterator, and you make sure you set its value properly. Also, and I've said, starting to sound like a broken record here, but make sure you always call unlock in a finally block. I've said that repeatedly throughout the course, so please make sure you get that straight in your implementations. And then down here, I'm not quite sure what the heck's going on here, but you don't want to be calling the Palantiri acquire method at this point, that needs to go at the very beginning of the method, at the very beginning of the acquire method on the Palantiri manager. So you're going to be calling the acquire method on the semaphore at the beginning of the acquire method for the Palantiri manager. Down here, don't use key set iterator, use entry set iterator, and also make sure that you provide the right generic type for the iterator. So if you see here, it should be like that. And you need to make sure you provide the right type to make it typed. Here you want to use an entry set instead of a Palantir, because you will have gotten the right kind of iterator up here. Make sure you're not using get here, that's way too inefficient. Instead, you want to use the entry set get value accessor method. And then down here, same thing. Do not be calling the put method on the Palantiri map. Instead, use the entry set SetValue. So you'll have to do some thinking to make sure you get all the pieces right, but that'll help you a bit. Down here, make sure you call ReadLock interruptibly, not ReadLock. That should be something that's going to be flagged by the unit tests. And there's also something super important that's missing here, which you'll need to do if you properly re-implement this code using the right kind of iterator. And there's no need to catch an exception here and rethrow the exception. That never makes any sense. Catching an exception and rethrowing the exception that you just caught, that's unnecessary. But what you do need to do is you need to put a way to unlock the stamped lock in a finally block at the end of the try finally block in this particular acquire method. Continuing on with problems with acquire, please make sure that you use ReadLock interruptibly when you acquire the stamped lock for reading. This just does ReadLock, which is incorrect. This specification also needs to be revised to use an iterator instead of a pair of for loops. That was from a previous assignment. That's not the assignment here. Please read the specification carefully. Down here, don't use get, use entry set get value. Don't use ReadLock, use ReadLock interruptibly. And I'm not sure what the heck's going on here, but this code does not belong here. It needs to be moved up here where we handle the case where the right stamp doesn't equal 0. And don't use the replace method here, use entry set SetValue. So you really need to get in the habit of understanding the motivation for skipping the use of things like get and replace or put when you can do a better job, a more efficient job using things like entry set get value and SetValue. So make sure you think carefully about why that's the case. And then down here, this is the wrong method to call. At the end of this try finally block, you want to be calling unlock, not unlock right, because it may be a ReadLock, not a ReadLock by that point. Yet another problem with acquire, please make sure that you always move methods like this above the try block. Down here, you want to use ReadLock interruptibly as opposed to using the, and that should also be moved. This should also be moved before the before the try block. So make sure you get in the habit of doing that. You don't need to have a while loop here. I don't know why you're calling SetValue. You should only be doing things that make changes when you've actually got a ReadLock. At this point, you only have a ReadLock, so make sure you do that correctly. Down here, you need to make sure you store the result that comes back from try convert to ReadLock. So it's stored in a stamped lock as opposed to just being used to check the return value. You're going to need that value in order to unlock the lock later correctly. And then down here, this code is also incorrect. I'm not quite sure why it's occurring twice, but you need to go back and take a careful look at the video and the code examples we walked through in class that shows how to write the stamped lock's conditional write model. And then this code doesn't belong here at all. I'm not sure what it's doing there, but that's not where it goes. And then finally, this code is forgetting to unlock the stamped lock. And if you do, well, when you do unlock it, you need to make sure you put it in the right place, and that means unlocking it in a finally block. So we're now done with the summary of problems to acquire methods that I saw throughout various people's implementations. Let's take a look at release. So make sure you, again, call the interruptibly versions of things, the ReadLock interruptibly, not ReadLock. You never need to call contains key. I've said this repeatedly throughout all the videos we've done. Never need to call contains key. That's not a sensible thing to do here. You want to be using replace and checking its return value. I'm not sure why unlock right is being called multiple places here. It's called here and it's also called down below, but you don't need to do it here. Also, unlock should always go in a finally block. Down here, this code, you need to make sure that you call unlock before you release the semaphore. It should be unlock, not unlock right. And you also need to make sure that you always call unlock even if the replace success flag is false. And again, as always, please make sure you call unlock in a finally block. Some other problems with release. First thing you need to do, and this has been the case since the very first assignment that was dealing with Palantiri Manager, always check if the Palantiri is null and bail out with the right exception if so. The code down here is very incomplete. It's got race conditions. It doesn't use StampedLock at all. It doesn't fulfill the comment specification. You need to go back and rewatch the videos that I've done for frequently made mistakes for earlier assignments to see how to do this stuff properly. But this is definitely wrong. And so I'm going to let you figure it out because this is something we've covered now multiple times. So like don't call contains key, check the return value of replace, only call release if the return value of replace is the right value, etc., etc. And then finally, the last problem with release, once again, do not call contains key. There is no need to do that. This code has race conditions because it's not using the StampedLock at all to ensure exclusive access to the critical section, which is bad. There's big honking chunks of the specification implementation missing here. You're not replacing anything, and you're not unlocking the lock. Of course, the lock was never locked, but that needs to be handled. And you need to make sure that you only call release if replace, or if you use put, if put returns the appropriate return value. So that's a summary of the frequently made mistakes that I saw when I reviewed people's code. Please make sure that you address these mistakes as quickly as you can, and take a look at the GitHub repos wiki page to see when you have to submit the final version.